Good evening and a very warm welcome to all of you on behalf of Crafts Council of Tamil Nadu for our conversation with Ritu Sethi on her passionate and tireless efforts towards the revival of languishing crafts. Before we start, I'd like to remind you of a few ground rules. Kindly ensure that you change your private settings to mute throughout the webinar. Please post your questions in the chat box during the webinar. At the end of the presentation, I'll read out the questions for the viewers for Ritu Sethi to answer. Thank you. I request past President Crafts Council of Tamil Nadu, Mrs. Lakshmi Ramachandran, to deliver the welcome address.
Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Executive Committee and Office Bearers of the Crafts Council of Tamil Nadu, I take great pleasure in welcoming all the members of Crafts Council of Tamil Nadu, Crafts Council of India, and other state councils and students and staff of various educational institutions to the webinar this evening on languishing crafts. A very warm welcome to our distinguished speaker this evening, Ms. Ritu Sethi, Chairperson of Craft Revival Trust. She has been a part of many organizations as board members and organized regular seminars on heritage, culture, tradition, and sustainability for more than a decade and spoken at forums in India and internationally. I welcome you all once again and sign off with these words by Seema Brain. Work done by you with unconditional love and pure devotion goes straight in the category of divine and immortal craft. Thank you.
Ritu Sethi is an advisory board member of the ICH Committee, Ministry of Culture, Government of India, besides being a member of policy groups constituted by the government on intangible culture, handlooms and crafts. She's on the advisory board of UNESCO centers in both Japan and China, on the Intact Heritage Craft and Community Division, CII Task Force on Art and Culture, besides several other institutions. Ritu Sethi served 4 terms on the Consultative Board of Examiners for the nomination to the Urgent Safeguarding List of World Intangible Cultural Heritage of UNESCO. In her last term, she was the chairperson of the consultative body. Ritu Sethi served as a member of high-powered panel of experts for the development of handlooms, panel of experts for the development of handlooms planning commission, and on the steering committee for handicrafts and handlooms for the development of the 12th Fire Plan Planning Commission, Government of India. Ritu Sethi served as a consultant to UNESCO on post-disaster need assessment on ICH. She has held positions that included being a board member of the Indira Gandhi Rashtriya Manav Sangralaya, IGRMS, National Museum of Humankind, Bhopal, and executive committee member, Center of Cultural Resource and Training, Ministry of Culture. She's also an executive committee member of Miranda House, Delhi University, and several other institutions. She has edited and written several publications. She writes a column in the Sunday edition of the Deccan Herald newspaper. Ritu Sethi has organized regular seminars on heritage, culture, tradition, and sustainability for more than a decade and spoken at forums in India and internationally. Over to you, Ritu Sethi, as you connect us with our roots and where an understanding of endangered crafts is a means to understand our own culture.
Thank you, Harita, for this very kind introduction. And thank you to the Crafts Council of Tamil Nadu, to Hema, to Harita, of course, to Rupa, and to Mrs. Lakshmi Ramachandran. I don't need to underline what a central part traditional craft knowledge, skills, and practice play in the cultural fabric of a country that is as rich and diverse as India. Yet in the very vibrancy and immediacy of these living traditions lies its ephemerality. And we are all aware that when a craft dies, it is not only the craftsperson who is affected, for with the craft also dies its history, its cross-cultural linkages, and its legacy, and the legacy that it holds for the generations to come. Therein lies a central concern of safeguarding that crafts and craftspersons remain visible, vibrant, retain their vitality and essence, yet continue to evolve and be interpreted for each new age. My talk today is divided into two parts. First, the definitional, and the second covers some examples, and I hope at the end, a lot of questions, so we can explore this area together. I'm now going to share my screen. The official definition of languishing or endangerment was arrived after a study conducted by NIF New Delhi under the aegis of the Office of the Development Commissioner, Handicrafts in 2007. And there are 3 points listed. The first being that the total number of craft practitioners are less than 25. Second, that because of its unviability, crafts have been replaced by other professions. And the third being that the next generation of the family is not interested in learning the craft. So while we have a base definition, the reasons for endangerment are quite complex, especially as the very term craft covers a huge patchwork quilt of incredible diversity and varied circumstance of practice that extends from the sacred, ritual, and ceremonial to the most quotidian and utilitarian products. Materials ranging from precious metal to clay from the pond and fibers from the field, with a continuum of knowledge and skills covering those of a Shilpguru to an apprentice. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. So by the very nature of this very vast subject, the reasons for endangerment can be any number and be unique to the craft in focus. Yet it would be very remiss of me not to very quickly venture a basic listing. Though I would red flag here the need to study the subtle but critical nuances which are often tacit and remain unspoken, which could affect the future viability of crafts and not just those that have been identified as endangered. This list could include social and demographic changes that affect and alter intergenerational knowledge transfer, including migration to cities, the devaluing of traditional knowledge and skills as book learning is considered of greater value, coupled with the perceived low status of craftspeople, often resulting in a lack of interest in the next generation and difficulties in recruitment of new entrants. Lack of awareness from potential customers about the craft, unwillingness to pay higher prices for the handmade, reduced demand for the product, changing consumer tastes, to a shift in consumer choice away from craft goods. Difficulties of earning a living from craft alone, the availability or not, and rising cost of raw materials, and the challenges of doing it all that is faced by small businesses. Loss of high craft skills, quality of available training, a lack of standards, the list just goes on. But now on to the crafts. And I start first. I was very conscious of my choice of crafts because I know I'm speaking to an audience that knows a great deal. And so I had decided not to include any craft from the south of India. But having said that, I felt I had to. So there is one craft from the south, and that is the Mangal Sutra glass seed bead making. And here, the black bead Mangal Sutra, the auspicious cord worn by Hindu women, is the instantly recognizable symbol of wedded status. The tradition and symbolism of this talismanic shield is as strong today as it has ever been. And though designs are now contemporary, the one thing that remains unchanged is that it is strung together with tiny black beads, yet unperceived by its vast number of wearers. These beads that were once the minutest handmade glass seed beads in the entire world have been replaced by plastic or by machine-made glass beads. This act of subtle substitution has led to the death of an ancient, globally renowned tradition of handcrafting. The incalculable consequences of this act of substitution has led to a loss, not just to the demise of a lineage of makers that extends back to antiquity, but of the technology of producing these beads. Produced in the small village of Papanaidupeta, located at a distance of about 21 kilometers from the temple town of Tirupati, the size and the thickness of the bead averaged from the mustard to the gingelly seed. The tale of its decline has many reasons, but I will pinpoint only one. That the glass bead makers here were hidden from the world by a chain of middlemen who never let on where the bead came from. In this veil of secrecy lay the seeds of its destruction. And in the 1990s, the handmade beads were slowly and subtly exchanged for low-price machine-made beads of plastic and glass. And as retailers were unaware of where the beads came from, they were unable to source the beads or deal directly with the makers. And the last time the glass furnace was lit in Papanaidupeta was 4 years ago. The second craft I'm going to touch upon is Danke Ka Kaam of Udaipur, Rajasthan. In a few workshops of Udaipur, an unusual form of glittering ornamentation called Danke Ka Kaam is embroidered onto textiles. The danka are small gold and silver square metal faceted discs, no bigger than 1.5 centimeters, that have been hand beaten to form a facet that glints and reflects light akin to a diamond. The danka lies at the heart of the opulent embroidered ceremonial poshaks worn by the Mewari Rajput women at weddings and festive rituals. Both the making of the danka pieces and its embroidery is practiced by the small Bora Muslim community who migrated to this area in the 16th century. Saifuddin Zariwala is the senior most of the practitioners, being the 7th generation of his family. With a little under 20 persons still engaged in the embroidery, yet only 2 people make the actual danka. Babubhai Kutubuddin Zariwal and his daughter Siddhika Banu are the sole custodians of the skill of making the actual danka. With gold motifs in high relief combined with jewel-like tones, the geometric floral and animal figures that form Usta Kaam can be seen architecturally ornamenting walls, pillars, and ceilings of heritage homes and palaces in Bikaner. It is also practiced on smaller objects such as saddles, boxes, vases, water containers, lampshades, mirrors, photo frames, you name it. Here the base being molded camel hide. Deriving its name from its maker community, the Ustas, who were invited from Multan, now in Pakistan, to the Mughal courts at Delhi, and later in time to the court of Raja Rai Singh in Bikaner. The process follows a building up of layers and patterns with the application of a glue-like gesso paint, which is then covered with gold foil and color. While demand for interior work from luxury hotels continues, for those who work with the smaller objects on camel skin, it has declined to just 4 or 5 craftsmen. While there are a list of reasons, I highlight just one. For this craft, like many others, has several processes, each carried out by a specialist craft community. And it wasn't for lack of orders, but because the community of Dagpars, who plied the complex craft of molding and stretching camel leather on clay molds, were rendered invisible in the process, as any recognition of the craft was being given only to the artists, Others in the value chain were forgotten. And by the time they were remembered, they had moved on to other professions, and just 2 Dagpars remain to do this work. The portable temple shrine carried from village to village by the Kavadia Bhat, the itinerant priest and genealogist who narrated regional epics and hero god stories to his village audiences. The recitation proceeds from the front panel to the inner one until the tale is completed, whilst the Bhat points to the appropriate illustration on the cover with a peacock feather. The last panel of the Sanctum Sanctorum opened only at the end to grant the viewers a darshan, a glimpse of the deity represented. At Bassi in Rajasthan, artisans of the Kumavad caste make the cover. Its basic structure is made of wood with multiple folding doors, each of which is vividly illustrated, sometimes with several stories, as the Kavadia Bhat could be the priest of different lands, or the subject story could be more appropriate for a particular date or for a particular festival. The cover is now being largely produced for the urban market, as what is truly endangered is the stories that were told, and indeed the Kavadia Bhat's connection to the craft. So here again, we have a sorry tale. In the 1960s, the twin villages of Umedpura and Tarapur in Javad, Madhya Pradesh were celebrated for their wax-resist block-printed textiles called Nandana, with its own distinct motif directory and color palette. Data reveals that there were 57 units employing over 1,000 persons. By 2009, their craft was already endangered, with only four workshops operating. By 2020, this has declined to only 2, a situation of severe endangerment. With 5 auspicious motifs, each with its own name, 14 complex steps in the process of wax resist, it was used to print the traditional clothing of the Bhil and Bhilal tribals of that area. And basically the ghagra or thick cotton gathered long skirt that they wore. Several things happened. The introduction of polyester saris, the availability of lightweight cloth that didn't need wax impressions to seep in the color, rising costs, and the opening up of competition from Bagh prints. Bagh, by the way, is located exactly by road 40 kilometers away from these twin villages. The Ganjifa game of 96 circular cards with 8 suits of 12 cards was a common pastime of nobles and peasants across India and South Asia. Widespread play led to the evolution of 2 styles of card making, the Darbar Kalam or courtly style and the Bazar Kalam or common style. The former made of the most precious metals from ivory, tortoise shell, mother of pearl to gold and silver leaf and painted by the best artists, while the latter was made of paper, papier-mâché, stiffened cloth and palm leaf. Replaced by the 52 set rectangular playing card pack introduced into India by the British, we are today referring to the more quotidian Bazar Kalam cards from Odisha, called Ganjappa, and made of cloth-pasted circles held in place by tamarind glue and papier-mâché. And even though they apparently are commonly available, they have been reduced to a touristic attraction as their detailed themes and illustrations have been replaced by simple motifs and meaningless dots, with very few craftsmen capable of making the traditional suit playing Ganjappa anymore. And why is that? It is because the art of play and its knowledge is becoming rarer and rarer. And though in Odisha, you can still see players of this trick-taking game, which is usually played by 3 to 5 players, they acknowledge that once their set of cards wears out, they will be unable to get a replacement. The last craft I'm going to talk about before we open to questions, because I think my 20 minutes is almost over, is the camel girth belt called the tongue. Domesticated animals were often as well adorned as their owners could afford. And we see this across museums where elephant trappings are created in the most sumptuous of material. In Rajasthan, it was the camel that was so adorned, and its trappings included the tongue or camel girth. These sturdy, narrow lengths of braiding are used to secure the heavy wood and metal saddle in position on the camel's back. Used in pairs, the tongue is made of natural colored goat hair or cotton cords using the split ply braiding technique, where sets of 4 plied cords are attached to a narrow support rod, and each cord follows an oblique course where it may be split in the process. Through the manipulation of this braiding technique, all kinds of patterns, figures of animals, trees, and birds are created. Again, a lost craft with just 2 people practicing, as the introduction of nylon and machine made, which are strong, colorful, has taken over this handmade process. But before I conclude, and open the floor to questions, I have to talk about the elephant in the room. For as we continue to be on the precipice of COVID-19, we can no longer be sure of the many certainties we took for granted. For more crafts and craftspeople will emerge into a vulnerable future. I hope that this very propitiously timed talk is also a call to a shared will. And I've seen it in action in the Crafts Council. That will help towards resolving and alleviating these issues of cultural loss in the future to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Ritu. I'll just check if there are any questions in the chat box. There are none as of now.
Can I just add a few things that I've been wanting to?
Yes, yes, please.
Thanks. Because I had to cut down my talk to 20 minutes, there were many other things that I wanted to just delve on.
Yes.
And one of them is that, you know, we talk of many reasons for craft to be endangered, but I see very often the critical aspect that we don't talk so much about, and that is the consumer. And in so many cases, it is the moving away of the consumer to other products that has caused this huge problem. And it is the second problem, which is my pet peeve actually, is copying and faking. And I have one statistic here that I didn't mention, which I'm going to just pull out. And that is that in 2009-2010, when one of the largest survey of handloom weavers took place, they were asked that, what is it that threatens your handloom craft the most? And across the country, more than 36% said that it was parloom and copying and faking. But let me tell you the facts that I have here, which are actually so startling, that the number went up to 84.6% in Andhra, 59% in Odisha, and 46.5% in Tamil Nadu, which are the weaving states. So this is another red flag that we need to be very conscious of when we work in this area. And the third thing I want to just pinpoint is that even when we feel a craft is endangered and in fact extinct, I can tell you of at least 4 cases where after even a century of decline, it has been revived. And one of the cases I will talk about is from Bangalore, where, as we all know, that in the hand-painted kalamkari, I think it was in 1903, that the art of painting wax lines on the Sri Kalahasti kalamkaris was lost. But this has been revived in Bangalore by Renuka Reddy. And the base that she used for reviving was she went to the craftspeople, studied the process, but equally critical was studying documentation that had been created at that time, because it was an art that I think in the industrializing world wanted to copy because of the huge export out of India and its impact on their balance of payment. So there was all very carefully documented. So studying that, studying from the craftspeople, she was able to bring it back. The other craft, even more interesting, was revived on the outskirts of Banaras by Rahul Jain, who studied the Mughal patkas, which were literally kinkhab, just woven gold, in museums overseas. And he came back and he set up a draw loom, which was not easy, but he found people who could make it. And he has been weaving these incredible Mughal patkas for museums all over the world. So that is a second remarkable case. The third is, of course, the huge Jamdani revival that we are seeing in Bangladesh, where they are even looking at finding the actual cotton, which was the root of the Jamdani, and they found it in Ahmedabad in one of the scientific research institutes, agricultural research institutes there. And they're starting the whole process again from planting the cotton with that short staple to the whole process of weaving. So it is a question of will. And I must congratulate the Crafts Council, because in their very quiet work, I know what amazing work they did with natural dyes. Now, the word natural dyes trips off our tongue. We forget from where it started. That slow training that I know was done by different Crafts Council, that slow building of the chain of getting in craftspeople who were doing natural dyeing and helping them sell their products, which were, of course, at higher prices than chemically dyed products. So many things are possible. So even when we feel, when I wanted to talk about Papanayadu-Peta, I mean, I am so sad about that, I cannot tell you. And the project that we worked on was sponsored by Titan. And I have called them many times. And I have said, how can you sell your Mangal Sutras, which are made with machine-made beads? All you have to do, a small project, start again. And when I was speaking to the people there, they have had visitors from all over the globe who have come and learned their knowledge. And by introducing just a few machines, have taken their craft from where it is to the other end. And it is a hugely arduous process, because researchers have even come there to study what they call proto-history, because they feel the process is so antique that it was what was followed by ancestors more than 800 to 1,000 years ago. So we too have to judiciously bring in a system of reducing arduousness, and I think that whole danger of that fire that is lit, the harm that can happen. So a lot can be done. And that is why in my conclusion, I said, if there's a shared will, a great deal can be done.
Definitely.
So
There's a question from Rajeshwari. Is it safe to say lack of innovation and utility could be a point for some traditional crafts becoming extinct?
You know, Rajeshwari, there is such a long list. I actually rushed through it. But the fact is that, you know, if you make products which can only be kept in a museum, it is only going to be 1 or 2 products that you make. So it has to be made appropriate for the times that we live in. And that is how we retain the vitality of a craft. But I'm glad you asked this question, because I also feel more and more now, after, you know, these 60 years of design innovation and intervention, that if we move too far from the mothership, we also will face a problem. And I give here the example of Sanji. When the Delhi Crafts Council started working on Sanji, it was really, there were just 2 families left and they were making bindis. So it was remarkable what an effort was made. When I was speaking to Vijay Kumar, he said to me that my biggest failing in life has been that while they are doing so well now, they go around the globe, they have worked through the year, is that we are now disconnected from the temples where we did our Sanjis. Because the Sanji has now become a paper cut. The whole essence was that it was in the worship of the divine, and it was effaced at the end of the day. And in him still beats that feeling. And why I bring this up also is that it is such an interesting craft that now the Aga Khan Foundation and so many others are producing hand-cut paper stencils used for covering of books, of calendars, or wedding cards. That my fear is that Sanji will be forgotten. It'll just be another paper cut. So it's such a, I mean, that is why we need crafts councils and not just business people, because this is where the balance is maintained, where we talk about the heritage, we talk about the link to the past, a link to who was the initial user. And in that case, it was the temples. And yes, livelihoods are critical because there will be no culture unless the people who practice culture can't earn a decent livelihood. But somewhere the link must remain.
Thank you, Ritu. There's another question.
Complicated answer.
There's another question from Nitya. You've spoken about 7 different languishing crafts today. I'm sure there are many more. How does one hear about these, and how do you do all the research? Is there a website for these languishing crafts?
Well, Nitya, you've asked me such a difficult question. You know, in 2007-8, when the Development Commissioner Handicrafts did their definition of languishing craft, which is now called endangered, they made a list of 35, which is available on their website, by the way, and I can even email it to you. And it is now 2020, and not one craft has moved off the list. So that in itself frightens me. But having said that, you know, my definition of languishing is, I would have actually liked to have talked more about the definition. And so I'm going to tell you a little snippet. In the 1980s, both chikankari embroidery and Zardozi were looked at as very tawdry crafts. There were more than 20,000 embroiderers of chikankari, and it was being sold in the bazaars. It was at that time that Seva Lucknow and Runa started working there, and Laila was the designer, I remember. And Abu Jani and Sandeep Khosla and Meera and Muzaffar Ali started working. And suddenly we saw what chicken was, what chicken of the museums was. So perhaps chikankari embroidery was also languishing because it had lost its link to the past. But the numbers were so huge that it would certainly not be considered languishing. But what was languishing was the quality. I mean, it was not something you could even imagine that a Nawab had used or was, thought of by, the legend goes that Noor Jahan was the one who started this embroidery. So you couldn't even put the two together. And it was the same with Zardozi. And I know that what revived Zardozi was actually Miss India and the costumes that were worn by Miss India, which had to glint and glitter on the stage. And also the start of the big fat Indian wedding where the bride had to be dressed, laden with gold. And Zardozi, which was being sold literally on wheelbarrows and, with their topis and hideous bags. I don't know how many of you remember, suddenly became the flavor of the month. And it doesn't matter where you are a bride from one end of India to the other and to the entire Indian diaspora, we want Zardozi embroidery on our clothing. And it came back at that time. Again, huge numbers of embroiderers, but no quality. So now I come back to your question. The question is to see, to observe. And when we come out of this COVID, let me tell you, even those crafts that we think were viable and vibrant, we actually don't know what kind of new world we are opening up to. Because all of us are actually consciously taking a decision not to shop so much. If we don't shop so much, we buy less. Lots of us buy handloom and handmade and handcrafted. Livelihoods will get affected. So just look around, just see what you see. And yes, also look at the online encyclopedia we work on called Asia Inch. There is information, I think, on over 2,100 crafts there. And that's the other thing I want to flag here. And that is that for me, even the scissors made in Meerut are a handcraft. Even that amazing, I don't know, all over North India, and I'm sure all over because we all wear iron saris, is that iron that is on the road. Even that is handcrafted. It is handcrafted. And who knows, one day we may look and find that the fellow who sits outside is gone. Our fountain pens have gone. Ink making has gone. So we have lost so much, which is from just around us. Sorry, every answer is actually open-ended. So.
Thank you, Ritu. There's another question from Gopal Krishna. What is your suggestion to face the machine-molded new bronze copies of Muradabad to the Chola Swami Malay craftsmanship?
Sorry, who was the question from?
Gopal Krishna.
Mr. Gopal Krishna, this is a huge problem. But what I want to say is that we can't stop anything. But one thing I would like is honesty in advertising. If I am buying something cast with a mold or with, where hundreds of pieces come out of a single mold, I would like to know that I'm buying something from a mold. And if I'm buying something that is completely handmade, I would like to know that I'm buying something completely handmade and pay for it. It's exactly the same situation with a Kolhapuri chappal, with a handloom sari. If I'm buying Paloom, it is my wish to buy a Paloom for whatever reason. But I would like to know I'm buying a Paloom and not be lied and cheated to and have it passed off as a handloom sari. And that is why the importance of labeling and telling the story. I cannot reiterate that more. And I have an interesting thing to tell you here, which was actually told to me by this young man called Nitin, who runs this website called iTokri. And on his website, he said that he sells different types of products, but he states very clearly what it is. And because they map their consumers so well, He says, sometimes I see they buy something that is not handmade. And then the same person, after enjoying what they have worn, they graduate to the higher level price of the handmade. So I think that is also what it is, that you know what you're buying and you aspire to the handmade. It is like aspiring to couture when you buy off the shelf from Zara. It's that same process. But we should know what we are buying and what we are getting and what we are paying for.
Thank you, Ritu. One question from me. Can social media platforms and designers and companies, CSR projects, can they collectively support this endangered crafts sector?
No, everyone can, even each and every one of us. I mean, we don't have to be specially qualified. We don't even need huge funds. But social media is very powerful. And I come back to the previous question here, that there is a very interesting hand block printing unit which works out of Chobundi and run by someone called Meeta Mastani. And they do these really modern prints. They're so modern that you know exactly that it's been done by them. So you can't pass it off as, you know, some old print that was silk screen and therefore you can copy it and this and that. And Dior printed the yoga dress, and it was on the cover, I think, of Vogue magazine. And on the cover of Vogue magazine, it was seen by everybody. And they wrote to them and said, hey, this is our yoga print. And the colors also look very much like that lovely terracotta color that we do over here with natural dyes. And they got no reply. And they wrote again, and I think they wrote about 3 or 4 times. And then they put it up on social media. Within a week's time, there was a settlement with Dior, who, of course, there was that whole thing about confidentiality. So we don't know what the payout was, but they did announce that we are now setting up a large center in Goa for traditional crafts. So I leave the rest to your imagination. So social media is hugely powerful.
Yes, it is. There are no other questions. We come to the end of the webinar. Aiding these craftsmen in their endeavors is definitely our undeniable duty. We hope through this webinar, CCTN platform will help us in creating public awareness. I request Nitya to propose the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Ritu Sethi, for taking out time to be a part of this webinar. We are grateful and honored to have such an interesting insight of your work. Your passion and dedication in your work will make us all think and look differently at languishing crafts. I would like to thank all the members of the Crafts Council of Tamil Nadu, the other state councils, and the participants of today's webinar. Thank you, Prashant, for the technical support for this webinar. Thank you all.
Thank you, Nitya. Very kind. Actually, this talk could have been done by any of your members. You all have worked so long and so hard that I know you would have. And so I wish that when this COVID ends, we can all meet and have a round table on it.
Definitely.
Thank you very much for asking me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ritu. Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Ritu.